There's a thing I'm seeing on some conspiracy theorist channels, some sort of, shall we say, over-enthusiastic preppers who, are convinced there will be some sort of an apocalypse. And it's always only a couple of months around the corner, and it's been only a couple of months around the corner for the last 15 years. There's other preppers who are city dwellers and rather naive or have little hope in their country engineers and countrymen in general. And basically, what it comes down to is they say that if the grid collapses, it's the end of civilization. God blimey. Let's just put it like this. Someone needs to get out a bit more. I understand that it may be the end of high-density living. My grandfather has told me from back in the 90s that basically if Japan had something happen in regards to its fish, say nuclear leakage from a nuclear power plant after a tsunami, and possibly several of those cases causing the fish around Japan to be wiped out, and they didn't receive imported food, they'd basically be out of food within about 2 or 3 days. Now, this may not exactly be the case, because I believe that during the tsunami the government had food rations. It wasn't much, but they had food rations to hand out, so they're storing a bit back. I don't also think this 2 or 3 days includes any warehouses. Not that they have a great deal of land space for warehouses. And, if you use the JIT method, the just-in-time method of, food delivery, and that, as a lot of the countries do, they basically don't use warehouses. It goes straight from the docks pretty much. Is transported straight out to shops shortly thereafter, or doesn't spend much time in the warehouse at all. And New York City and places like that, there'll be hell to pay if there's some sort of a big disaster and nobody's prepared, or there's no military coming to bail them out because there's some sort of an EMP event. And high-density living, it may be the end of it, But to say it's the end of civilization is naive, to say the least. That's an understatement, actually, to say it's naive. Because there's people like me, and people I know, and country Australians, and American hillbillies, and other people who have had it hard, and engineers who have got their heads screwed on, and people good with their hands who can work their arse out. Farmers, stuff like that. People like that. Where I grew up as a kid, I'll tell you a few things about cases where the grid's been cut off in a big way, and people have worked themselves out. Now, where I grew up as a kid, there was no such thing as I've rented a coffee, I'll go to the shop to get a coffee. It was a little bit far out to warrant that, so you'd store up enough stuff. But my father and his boss made so much equipment out of scrap old trashed things they had laying around, old things that had rusted out, old machines and bits and pieces, and with a welder and an angle grinder they could just about make whatever you dreamed of. I mean, seriously, they made some stuff. And that was the way we were back there. But there's a few other places where, these things have been and then they haven't been. Here, for example, we were basically cut off from the rest of the world, and we only have a small oil supply. until something that happened 6 months ago. We found $21 trillion of oil in Queensland, one big oil field. You know, but back in the 1940s and that, and even until 6-9 months ago, you know, we could only produce 40% of what we used. And, you know, when the Japanese cut us off, it was looking pretty hairy. And what did we do? Did we get in a panic? Did we all start committing suicide because we're going to die anyway? No, we didn't. We used gasifiers. We had fuel rationing and gasifiers. Plenty of businesses use trucks with gasifiers. My great uncle's friend had one. Another great uncle I have, who has since passed away, he drove one as all day, every day, his day job was driving a truck with a gasifier. He would pick up and deliver milk because he worked for a dairy that done a lot of processing of milk and that, and they didn't just have their own dairy and that, they actually bought off other people and bottled it and resold it. And his job was just driving that stuff around in the truck all the time. And, you know, it was a coal-powered gasifier that he had. You know, let's talk about the Swedish. They had a terrible habit of being a neutral country, but everything they got, they just somehow managed to sell to the Nazis. Yeah, funny that. Very neutral. So what happened was, in one instance, one example is they got $47 million of credit from America. They borrowed $47 million off some big American bank. 1 week later, they lent $45 million of that. They only kept $2 million. They lent $45 million of that to Hitler. And I think the same was happening with oil. They were selling coal and steel, which they had in their own country, to the Nazis, but I think they may have been selling oil, and basically I have a feeling that a few people may have got sick of that and cut the oil supply off for them. And 90% of their vehicles were ran on gasifiers. 90%! I have seen video of cars being made in Sweden that were designed on the drawing board, built from the ground up to be gasified vehicles. There was no petrol tank in these things that I know of. There was no carburetor that I know of. But they had pipes underneath them and a gasifier at the back, built into the bodywork of the vehicle. This is built from the ground up to be gasifier-ran vehicle. They were also very good with making synthetic diesel, or synthetic oil it was called then, from coal, using coal gasification and the Fischer-Tropsch process, I believe. And they showed the Nazis how to do that, and for the remaining diesel vehicles they had, which I assume was the remaining 10%, they were most likely doing that as well. You know, people work these things out when they're hard pressed. Let's talk about the South African apartheid government. Now, there were plenty of other countries who barred trade with them due to what they got up to. Basically, they formed a Swiss company, which was, oh no, it's a legitimate corporation, yes, it's just a company in Switzerland. And they used that company as a conduit to buy stuff that people wouldn't sell them, such as weaponry, such as ammunition, things of that nature. Other specialised stuff that they had to get but couldn't get because it wasn't going to be sold to them. Furthermore, at some point the oil supply would cut off from the South African government, the imported oil supply. I don't know if it completely was, but it was very restricted. They went and built what is the world's largest synthetic fuel plant using the Fischer-Tropsch process next to a very large coal mine. And this thing is still operational today. It used to be government owned, it is now privately owned, but it is still in operation as I speak. And that was running most of the vehicles in the country. You know, people work these things out. When they're jammed up against a rock and a hard place, you've got to work it out. It may be survival instinct kicks in, but there's enough people who are engineers who have got more than concrete in their heads to be able to think this stuff out, work it out. They've got a mechanical understanding, as I have. I'm not an engineer. I'm not as good as some engineers I know. I'm not as good as some other people I know. You know, there's a bloke used to be a friend of my uncle's who was a mechanic. He is brilliant with equipment, but he's since passed away. But his son's also very good with equipment. Anything to do with engines, good blimey, like, yeah, they know what they're doing. You know, there's heaps of people like this. And they work themselves out. Why do they work themselves out? Because they've got to. They've got no other option. And this is the whole thing. You know, this idea that it's going to be the end of civilization, it may be the end of cities, but it's not going to wipe the whole of America off the map and it's all just going to be chaos and this and that and blah, blah, blah. You know, people work themselves out. We've faced plenty of hard things here in Australia, you know, where you work yourself out, you know, because you've got to. And if you've got no brains, you mightn't be able to. But there's plenty of people who do have brains, creativity, and one of the best things of all, improvisation. I've sort of worked it out that if everything went to hell in a handbag and I had a reasonably full water tank here, I'd be able to survive without a problem for 6 months. Washing clothes may be a bit of an issue, but it wouldn't be as convenient, but I could still do it. You know, there's a lot of sort of edible weeds I know about. You know, you look at edible weeds, you look at plants, you know, edible plants in the forest, berries in the forest, you know, and farmers who produce wheat, and even myself producing sheep. You know, we work ourselves out. And if there is a really hard situation, including an EMP situation, yes, there will be heaps of people die from lack of medicine. There may be some people go crazy who need medication to keep themselves sane. There may be some people who just go crazy out of panic. But it's not going to be the end of civilization. It's going to be a start of the break of the grid dependency that people have. Don't look at it as possibly being an end, but possibly being a beginning to throw off the shackles of arsehole corporations, mongrel governments, and grid slave mentality, you know. And that's the way of looking at it in a good light, but, you know, this is the thing. People work themselves out. Yeah.